In August of 2007, a 12-year-old girl was walking along the shore of a beach on Jedediah Island in British Columbia when she saw a shoe on the sand. It was a men's size 12 blue and white running shoe. Now, for whatever reason, she decided to go up to the shoe and look in it. And I don't know many people who go looking into random shoes like that, but it's a good thing she did because there was something pretty crazy inside. A chopped off foot. Yeah. So like inside the shoe, there was a sock, and inside the sock was a little human foot, severed at the ankle. 6 days later, a couple was on a nice oceanside hike in Gabriola Island, British Columbia, when she saw a black and white Reebok sneaker. And sure enough, there was a severed foot inside. Oh, and get this, the second shoe found was also a men's size 12. So on 2 different occasions, a singular size 12 shoe washed up on the ocean in Canada with a cut off foot inside. That can't be a coincidence. And I know what you're thinking. Do both feet belong to the same person? I thought the same thing too until I found out that they were both right feet. An officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police said in a newspaper interview, finding one foot is like 1,000,000 to 1 odds, but to find 2 is just crazy. Foot number 1 was eventually matched to a deceased man whose family declined to provide any additional information. The only thing mentioned in one of the articles about this case is that he suffered from depression, which I think is only mentioned to suggest that this man ended his own life. Foot number 2 hasn't been identified yet, but officials were able to determine it most likely floated up the south and was brought ashore by an animal. Well, over the next year, 5 more feet washed up in that area. Foot number 3 was found in a size 11 right Nike sneaker. It was later matched to a 21-year-old man from Surrey, BC, who was reported missing 4 years earlier. Foot number 4 was found in a woman's blue and white right New Balance shoe. This was the first foot belonging to a female, breaking the trend of all male feet. Later, the shoe was identified as belonging to a woman who jumped from a bridge in New Westminster in April 2004, an incident that occurred over 3 years before the foot was recovered. It makes me wonder what happened during those 3 years. Foot number 5 was found in a size 11 left Nike sneaker. This one broke the trend of only right feet washing up, and intensely enough, the foot was determined to belong to the same man who had foot number 3, but they washed up 4 months apart. Foot number 6 was spotted by a camper on a beach in Washington. It was a right men's size 11 sneaker and was the first of the feet to wash up outside of BC, although officials believed it traveled south in the water. But with foot number 7, we were back in Canadian territory. This one was inside a woman's left New Balance shoe. It was later matched to the other woman's foot found several months prior. So at this point, everyone was like, what in Usher's name is going on? All these feet were surfacing on land in very concerning circumstances. For starters, it's just strange that these feet weren't connected to a body. They were all coming in at random times. They were all found inside tennis shoes. And here's the thing though, even though these feet were often referred as severed feet, there was no proof that they were actually cut off like that. A constable in the case states, we want to make it clear, there was no evidence that these feet had been severed. There's no tool markings and no visible signs of trauma. It appears that these feet have naturally disarticulated from the bodies through natural processes. I want to say that makes more sense, but I honestly don't know if it does though. Like, how would all of these people casually land themselves in the ocean and only their feet were coming up? It almost seems more logical that there was a serial killer who went around chopping people's feet off and dumping them in the ocean. Although according to my good friend science, bodies naturally decompose fairly quickly in the water, and they often sink to the bottom too. But portions of the body that are more protected, like a foot inside a shoe with rubber soles and thick fabric, don't decay as quickly. Also, shoes float pretty easily because 1, they have rubber soles, and 2, they are often air pockets in shoes that make it easy for them to rise up. Another thing science tells us is that it's common for decomposing bodies to separate at the joint. And if these bodies sank to the bottom of the ocean, they were likely fed on by sea creatures who prefer to gnaw on the soft, fleshy parts, not the bony joints. So they probably sped up the process of the foot separation, which would allow the shoe to float to the top with the foot inside. All that to say, the concept of a foot coming apart from its leg sounds absolutely insane, but in reality, it's kind of natural. Even though it's natural for a foot to break apart from the body in water, was it natural for 7 feet to wash up in the same type of shoe in the same area? Hell no! And over the next 10 plus years, things only got weirder because 14 more feet washed up in British Columbia and Washington, most of which were inside running shoes, but a few were found in hiking boots. So why is this happening? That's something still debated to this day. As you can imagine, this phenomenon dominated the media in Canada and beyond. It didn't take long for people to start coming up with all sorts of theories about whose feet they were and why they were getting washed up. Back in 2005, there was a plane crash on Quadra Island in BC. 5 people were suspected to have lost their lives, but only 1 body has ever been recovered. Based on the location and time the first 5 feet were found, as well as the state of decomposition they were in, officials theorized they all belonged to the victims of the plane crash, but all 5 people involved in the plane crash were men, and mystery foot number 4 was determined to have belonged to a woman. So the plane crash theory wouldn't be true for all 5 feet. And as more and more feet started appearing on the sand, this theory was pretty much thrown away. Another popular theory in the beginning was that this was an intentional act. There was a vicious foot-severing criminal on the loose. But as I mentioned earlier, none of the feet were determined to have actually been cut off like that, and no other evidence has proved this theory. 2 other subcategories in the "someone did this on purpose" theory was that the feet were dumped there by mob bosses, dealers, or traffickers. A forensic anthropologist who worked on the case said she and her colleagues got all sorts of tips in that vein. She said that people had called in about things as wild as containers full of migrants that are sitting at the bottom of the ocean. She then went on to say, aliens had that one as well, and occasionally a psychic. Actually, pretty much every single time a psychic will call and offer to help. But as I mentioned earlier, there had been no proof to suggest any of these victims were slain by someone else and had their feet cut off, which leads me to my next theory, that all these feet belong to people who were involved in natural disasters, like tsunamis. Over time, this theory had become a bit looser because if you remember, 2 of the feet were later identified as belonging to a woman who jumped off a bridge. So while this theory isn't completely off the table, it's safe to say not all of these victims passed accidentally. Some could have taken their own life or were robbed of it by someone else. To me, I feel like this could be a combination of all the theories. There were feet belonging to several different people. Some could have taken their own lives. Some could have been executed by a demented criminal. Others could have gotten caught in a hurricane. And heck, maybe even 1 or 2 of the victims were from the plane crash. But Mack, why were they all found in the same region? I'm so glad that you asked, hypothetical viewer at home. All these feet washed up from the Salish Sea, an inland portion of the Pacific Ocean in between BC and Washington. The ocean current there is known to easily trap things in and recirculate them. The winds in the area also make it easier for things to be pushed into the Salish Sea. So let's just say there's a lone foot floating in a shoe in the ocean. A big gust of wind comes in, and then it sends the shoe into the Salish Sea. It sloshes around for however long, and then eventually it washes up. An oceanographer named Richard said, "There's a lot of recirculation in this region. We're working here with a semi-enclosed basin. The tidal currents and the winds can keep things that are floating recirculating in the system." Richard also pointed out that most people in the Pacific Northwest are super outdoorsy and wear tennis shoes or hiking boots, which means this could all be one wacky coincidence. So out of the 21 feet discovered, only 10 have been identified, belonging to 8 people in total, because if you remember, there were 2 full pairs of feet identified. Who are the 8 people? Well, we already know about the man with depression and the woman who jumped off the bridge, but here's what we know about the other identified victims. One was a fisherman who'd been missing since 1987. His foot wasn't found until 2011. Another known victim is 22-year-old Antonio Neal, who was reported missing on December 12th of 2016. Leading up to his disappearance, Antonio went through a breakup, mourned the loss of his uncle, and served a month in jail. Once he was released, he showed up at his mom's doorstep and seemed to be in good spirits. Anthony's mom ordered a new phone for him, and he said he was going to a friend's house. Anthony never came back to pick up his phone, and his mom believes he may have relapsed on substances. It is said that Anthony was couch surfing around that time, and shortly after his car was stolen is when he vanished. Antonio was officially seen on December 12th wearing a t-shirt and jeans. The reason I say that is because it was December in Everett, Washington, so it was really freaking cold. Antonio left jackets and blankets at the house he was staying at, which makes me think he wasn't planning on leaving for good. Maybe he was abducted. There were a few other reported sightings of Antonio, and while they were never officially confirmed, they gave Antonio's family a false hope that he was still alive out there somewhere. But come January 1st, 2019, when a boot washed up on Jetty Island with a foot inside, any sense of hope was chucked out the window because it was Antonio's foot. The rest of his remains have yet to be found, which Antonio's mom said is so scary, not having all of him and just not knowing what's going on. Antonio's mom is certain her son was intentionally killed by somebody, but there's no evidence to prove that theory yet. She said, "We are no closer to finding what happened to him. We have a lot of leads that are just rumors. We feel that someone is responsible for this, and we need help finding whoever did this." Yeah, it definitely sounds like foul play. I mean, if Antonio had been in jail and was involved in substances, it's possible there was someone out to get him. Based on what his mom said, Antonio was turning a new leaf. He was trying to make something of himself. It's just all so sad. Another known victim from the bunch was a 79-year-old man named Stanley Okamoto. He was reported missing from Kitsap County, Washington on September 19, 2007. His car was found the following day, but foul play wasn't suspected. That November, Stanley's partial remains appeared on a beach in Nia Bay, Washington. And then on December 8th, his leg washed up near the Jordan River on Vancouver Island, with his foot and shoe still attached. Stanley's leg and foot most likely made it up to Vancouver Island during the king tides, which were happening around that time. King tides are unusually high tides that involve very strong currents, making it easy for a body part to travel north like that. Some of the other identified victims remain anonymous to the public, but I can imagine their families are still seeking answers. About half of the feet that mysteriously surfaced during this have yet to be identified though. The Coroner's Service has compared DNA from each foot to a database of missing people in British Columbia, as well as Canada's new National Missing Persons DNA program that launched in 2018. But officials have been unable to determine who the remaining feet belong to. It's hard because some of those feet spent a very long time in the ocean. Over time, it becomes harder to get a good DNA sample from a foot that suffered the harshness of the salty ocean water for that long. And it's not like you can tell much about who someone is by a decaying foot in a waterlogged shoe. So even though scientists and medical professionals have been able to explain away this whole phenomenon, people are still suspicious that something deeper is going on. Back in 2007, there was an influx of missing men in the Vancouver area ranging from 19 to 32 years old. From the late 1990s to the early 2000s, over 20 men vanished in the area, and most remain unaccounted for. So what if some of these feet belong to the men who went missing, and this whole series of discoveries was from an intentional body dump? Sure, there may have been a few outliers of people involved in accidents or self-inflicted injuries, but most people have a hard time brushing this whole thing off. What do you think about why these feet were washing up, and who do they belong to? Was there a criminal behind it all, or was it just the perfect combination of natural disasters and accidents working in tandem with the ocean's current? I'll see you guys next time, and until then, keep an eye out for floating feet in the ocean.